The air conditioning unit in Rebecca's studio apartment wheezed like a dying animal, barely managing to push stale air through the cramped space. The walls were bare concrete, painted white years ago, but now stained yellow from heat and neglect. Only one decoration broke the monotony, a faded photograph taped above her desk. Its corners curled from humidity and time. 5 soldiers stood beneath a crumbling archway somewhere in the Syrian desert. They were laughing, squinting against harsh sunlight, their gear dusty and worn. The woman on the far left, barely 20 then, had dark hair tucked under a desert scarf and weathered hands gripping a rifle like it was part of her body. That was before everything changed, before the tribunal, before they erased her from every record that mattered. Rebecca's apartment was a study in military precision. Her bed was made with hospital corners. The floor was swept clean. Her gear, bag sat untouched beneath the small table, collecting dust for the past 8 months. These days, she worked in the communications base 6 blocks away, running diagnostics for private contractors who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. She wore civilian clothes. Her name appeared on no official rosters. Most days, she preferred it that way. The encrypted message arrived without warning on her tablet, routing through channels she'd assumed were dead for years. The file carried a numerical hash that meant nothing to outsiders, but everything to someone who'd once belonged to a very specific command structure. A structure that had officially disavowed her existence. Rebecca hesitated before opening it. The footage rolled in grainy infrared satellite imagery with no audio track. A hillside compound with collapsed walls and muzzle flashes blooming through smoke. Heat signatures blinked across the screen like dying stars. Most were static. Some faded. But one pulsed irregularly behind a concrete barrier, one arm raised in what looked like a signal. She slowed the frame and zoomed in. The image pixelated, but the outline remained clear. The way the figure moved, the rhythm of his gestures. She knew that pattern. Jonathan. Her throat tightened, but she made no sound. She hadn't spoken his name in 3 years. Not since the inquiry. Not since he sat across from that tribunal and claimed the decision had been hers alone. She'd never blamed him for the lie. It saved his career while ending hers. What she blamed him for was the silence that followed. No calls, no contact. Just absence where friendship used to be. The timestamp showed the footage was less than 6 hours old. There was no origin trace, no metadata trail. Whoever sent this knew what they were doing and wanted her to know it. Rebecca stood slowly, bare feet creaking against the warped floorboards. She crossed to her closet and pulled out a duffel bag that hadn't been opened in months. Inside, wrapped in an old towel, was a rifle that had once been her closest companion. She unwrapped it carefully, checking the bolt and receiver with practiced movements. The weapon was clean, oiled, ready, never neglected, despite never being used. She attached the suppressor with muscle memory guiding her fingers. Next came a case from under her bed, foam-lined and containing spare magazines, range cards, and a folded discharge notice she couldn't bring herself to read. She pushed the papers aside and lifted out a scope, clicking it into its mount without sound. On the desk, her tablet still showed that frozen frame. The heat signature blinked like a heartbeat, calling her back to a war she'd tried to leave behind. But wars don't end just because you walk away from them. Sometimes they reach back without permission. She checked the rifle one final time and slung it across her shoulder. Her boots were exactly where she'd left them. The laces pulled tight with a sound like whispered promises. Around her neck went the faded scarf from the photograph, not for warmth, but for memory. Outside, dawn was breaking over the industrial district, painting everything the color of old brass. Rebecca paused at her door, looking back at the photograph one last time. Then she stepped into the morning and locked the door behind her. She had somewhere to be, The abandoned garage smelled of motor oil and decay, lit by fluorescent bulbs that hummed with electrical arthritis. Rebecca stepped into the space without hesitation, her rifle case slung low, boots silent on cracked concrete. 3 figures waited in the shadows like ghosts from another life. Marcus sat behind a folding table, laptop open, blue light casting harsh angles on his unshaven face. The former intelligence analyst looked exactly as tired as she remembered. David leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, a coil of fiber optic cable in his hands still stained from their last mission together, the one that had gone sideways and cost them everything. Ashley stood furthest back, half hidden in shadow, a tablet in one hand and an unlit cigarette in the other. No one spoke as Rebecca entered. She hadn't expected pleasantries. Marcus broke the silence first, his voice flat and businesslike. "Bad time to go vigilante. Thought you'd learned that lesson." Rebecca didn't answer. She laid her rifle case on the table and unzipped it slowly, the weapon remaining concealed. Ashley's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Figured they'd shipped you off somewhere you couldn't cause trouble," Ashley said. You were pushing papers for defense contractors now." Rebecca pulled out a paper map, not digital, not encrypted, just old-fashioned fieldwork tools. She unfolded it on the table beside Marcus's laptop, the edges worn from years of use. David shifted uncomfortably. "Seriously? Paper maps? No satellite overlays, no drone intelligence?" "The satellites won't help us where we're going," Rebecca said, smoothing the map with her palm. "They're buried too deep in that canyon. Intelligence is 3 days old and already being scrubbed." Marcus looked up from his screen. "Scrubbed is right. Every tag on that Marine unit has been delisted. Their mission vanished from all databases yesterday. You don't erase a recon team unless someone wants them forgotten permanently." Rebecca pointed to a canyon marked on the map. "They're not gone. Not yet." Marcus turned his laptop toward the group. The same 6-second loop played endlessly, muzzle flashes, heat bloom, then nothing. "This is all that exists on any server I can access. No communications logs, no air support records, no extraction plans. Someone's cleaning house fast." Ashley exhaled slowly, still not lighting her cigarette. "And you think dragging us across a hostile border for a rescue that officially doesn't exist is the solution?" "I'm not dragging anyone," Rebecca said quietly. "I'm going with or without you." David stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working silently. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with old anger. "You called off my extraction 3 years ago. 2 of my team died because of that decision." "No," Rebecca said simply. The admission hung in the air like smoke. David didn't respond, just wound the cable tighter around his fist. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming once on the laptop before he closed it. "I've been monitoring agency communications. There are unmarked units moving toward that ridge. Same encrypted channels we used for black operations. They're not going there to help Ghost Team. They're going there to erase them." Ashley tapped ash from her unlit cigarette. "If we get spotted, we disappear too, permanently." "I know," Rebecca said again. David dropped the cable onto a wooden crate with a dull thud. Marcus studied Rebecca's face, looking for something he apparently found. He reopened his laptop. "I'll maintain satellite uplink until you're out of range," he said. "After that, you're walking blind into hostile territory." Ashley stepped forward, shutting off her tablet. "I'm not here for some rescue fantasy. But I owe Jonathan, and something about this whole situation stinks." Rebecca nodded. "I'm not asking you to believe. I'm asking for overwatch, communication support, and one chance to be right." David walked over and grabbed a corner of the map, studying elevation markings with professional interest. "We'll need to cut through the burned orchard. still scorched from the last drone strike. Easier to move quietly. Marcus snorted. So we're really doing this? No one answered. Rebecca folded the map with careful precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd made harder decisions than this. We move in 4 hours. Ridge approach. Single shot protocol if we're compromised. No uplink once we pass the second checkpoint. She slung her rifle case over her shoulder and headed for the exit. The others followed without speaking, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Outside, hot wind scattered dust across the gravel lot. Rebecca crouched and gathered a pinch of loose soil, letting it fall from her fingers. It drifted west. That way, she said quietly, and they went. They crossed into Syria just after midnight, moving like shadows through terrain that officially didn't exist on any current map. The path was barely visible, worn smooth by generations of smugglers and refugees, now monitored by satellites that saw everything and recorded nothing. The landscape was a graveyard of better times, where orange groves once thrived, only skeletal. Remains jutted from poisoned earth. Irrigation pipes lay twisted and sun-bleached, their contents long since evaporated. The ground was littered with the detritus of modern warfare shell casings, shrapnel, and things that glinted in moonlight but were better left untouched. Ashley kept her drone tablet clutched tight, its display dimmed to almost nothing. Ancient. Topographical data scrolled beneath her fingers, unmarked by recent events. She whispered that they were approaching the minefield perimeter. Rebecca didn't acknowledge the warning. She crouched low, examining the earth with a penlight no bigger than her thumb. Old blast patterns were still visible if you knew where to wire. Look, subtle ripples in the soil, disguised by time and weather. She moved forward slowly, marking safe passages with broken twigs. David followed at 20 paces, eyes scanning dead tree lines that offered no cover but might hide watchers. Marcus brought up the rear, rifle ready, checking both their back trail and the route ahead. Every few minutes, he paused to monitor communications traffic on his handheld unit. The frequencies were silent. That worried Rebecca more than chatter would have. They reached the observation tower just before dawn. It rose from the ridge like a broken bone, its antenna array twisted into abstract art by high explosives. The blast that destroyed it must have happened years ago, but somehow the framework still held. The structure didn't appear on Ashley's outdated maps, which was exactly why it would work. Building that shouldn't be standing, Marcus muttered. That's why it's perfect, Rebecca replied. They approached from the south, stepping carefully between boulders. Wind carried fine dust across their gear, coating everything in gritty film. By the time they reached the base, Rebecca's hair was streaked with dirt and her scarf was dark with perspiration. Ashley checked her tablet. No thermal signatures. No movement. Rebecca scanned the ridge with naked eyes. That's not the same as clear. She moved ahead without another word. 20 paces out, she stopped cold, her hand rising slowly with fingers spread. Everyone froze instantly. 3 seconds passed in perfect silence. Then came movement, a blur low and left, barely a ripple in the sparse brush. Rebecca dropped to one knee and fired once. The suppressed shot hissed through dry air with no echo, no spray of debris. Just a soft thud as something heavy hit the ground. David whispered, "How did you even see that?" "I didn't," Rebecca said, rising. "I felt it." They swept the tower quickly. Most of the interior had collapsed into rubble, and the second level was gone entirely. But the top platform held, anchored to the ridge with steel cables, like some kind of modern art installation. It was exposed, yes, but it had line of sight to everything that mattered. Rebecca set her paper map on cracked concrete and weighted the corners with rifle cartridges. The compound below stretched across the valley, floor like an open wound. Half the walls were down. Scorch marks blackened the courtyard, and smoke still rose from several structures. She went prone, adjusting her rifle's bipod legs with practiced precision. Marcus powered up his communication gear. "Got active signals," he reported. "Unauthorized transmissions east of our position. Not patrol frequencies. They're hunting." Rebecca didn't look up from her scope. How close? Unknown. No directional beam. Could be 2 kilometers. Could be sitting right behind us. She adjusted her optics, compensating for heat, shimmer, and smoke. The compound was active bodies moving, some wounded, most not. She studied angles, doorways, debris fields, settling into the rhythm her body remembered. Ashley leaned closer. Movement near the east wall. Friendly or hostile. Rebecca tracked a figure as he dragged another behind a fallen pillar. The way. He moved cautious, efficient, switching positions with his left shoulder leading instead of his right, using his elbow to reposition the wounded man instead of grabbing and pulling. She didn't need to see his face. It was Jonathan Dodd. She kept that knowledge to herself. The wind rose with the sun, turning the valley into a furnace. From the tower, the compound below had transformed from still to chaotic. Muzzle flashes rippled through broken walls in sporadic bursts. Smoke drifted across the lower courtyard in thick bands, reducing Ashley's tablet display to useless static. David crouched behind a concrete fragment, scanning the distance through binoculars. 2 figures moving near the breach. Can't tell friendlies from hostiles. Ashley looked up from her drone feed. Satellite imagery stopped updating. Either we're being jammed or someone's feeding us old footage. Marcus's voice drifted up from him. Below, dry and matter-of-fact. Every agency database lists Ghost Team as eliminated. No survivors, no rescue protocols in effect. They're not eliminated, Rebecca said quietly. She lay stretched across the upper platform. I pressed to her scope, breathing synchronized with the valley wind. The rifle's metal was warm now, heated by sun and her steady grip. Air shimmered above distant rooftops, distorting silhouettes into waves of movement. But patterns tell stories that eyes can miss. A figure sprinted across open ground, staying low. He paused near a stairwell, tapped twice on the ground with his weapon stock, then moved left. Rebecca didn't need facial recognition. That rhythm was burned into her memory. Another shape emerged from behind a destroyed vehicle. Rifle raised, angling toward Jonathan's position. Rebecca adjusted her scope a fraction of an inch, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed shot traveled invisibly across the valley. The hostile dropped without warning. David turned to stare at her. That was a blind shot through smoke. No, Rebecca said simply. It wasn't. 2 more targets followed, one near the western wall, another moving diagonally up the slope toward the ridge. Both fell mid-stride to shots that seemed impossible. Ashley's voice was tight. None of these targets appeared on my screen. They were there, Rebecca said. Marcus climbed to the upper level, jaw clenched with tension. Kill team just pinged 2 clicks out. No identification codes, tight formation, moving fast. Ashley's tone sharpened. They're not coming to extract survivors. They're coming to ensure there aren't any. Rebecca turned an elevation dial on her scope. They're ahead of schedule. Marcus checked his handheld again. Radio silence across all frequencies. They're not tracking enemy communications. They're tracking our people. No one spoke for a moment. Wind shifted, dragging more smoke across their position. Below, signal flares flickered erratically through the haze. Not fired high for air support, but low and desperate. Close-range communication between people running out of options. David leaned forward. That's not random movement. Rebecca confirmed it without hesitation. Jonathan's running a protection pattern, cycling between 2 wounded. You're certain? I've run that sequence with him 50 times. Another crack of gunfire echoed through the valley. Marcus checked his equipment again, still nothing but silence. Ashley tapped her screen uselessly. We're operating blind, she muttered. Rebecca didn't flinch. We're not blind. We're just not looking the right way. She watched a figure on a distant rooftop shift position. Weight distribution wrong. Shoulder angle too wide. Not Jonathan. Not friendly. She fired. He dropped. David studied her in silence before asking, "Are you seeing ghosts or just locked into some kind of zone?" "I know how Jonathan moves," Rebecca said. The truth was more complex than that. She knew how he breathed before taking a difficult shot. She knew he counted seconds aloud during stress. She knew he tapped his boot twice before changing positions. Those patterns were as distinctive as fingerprints to someone who'd shared 1,000 dangerous moments. Tension climbed with the temperature. Marcus began packing his gear. "We need to extract," he said. "That team down there is already buried by bureaucracy. Staying here means vanishing with them." "They're not buried," Rebecca replied. "There's no visual confirmation, no official support. I don't need official confirmation. I have memory." Another flare blinked once in the courtyard. A figure darted between debris piles, drawing fire from 2 different angles. Rebecca tracked both shooters and eliminated them with clean, precise shots. "Still think she's guessing?" David asked. Ashley didn't respond. Marcus glanced at his receiver. "Kill team reaches this ridge in 15 minutes. If they spot us, there won't be any distinction between contracted personnel and rogue operators." "We're staying," Rebecca said. "Staying means getting burned alongside them." She lifted her eye from the scope, just long enough to meet his gaze. "You think I don't know that?" Marcus backed down, checking his magazine in silence. The courtyard. Rhythm was shifting again. Jonathan was moving faster now, tighter arcs, buying time for wounded teammates. Rebecca could feel it in her spine, a familiar dance of survival. She'd performed countless times. Then new shapes entered the far corridor. Light gear, no helmets, moving with professional efficiency straight through the chaos. The first of the kill team. Rebecca didn't fire immediately. Instead, she shifted her scope, checking the path behind them. 2 more followed, same spacing, same disciplined movement. Not local militia. Trained professionals. "They're not engaging targets," she sighed. "They're heading for our people." Ashley questioned this assessment. Rebecca clarified without emotion. "They're not here to end the firefight. They're here to ensure no one walks away from it." David asked the obvious question. "So what's our play?" Rebecca chambered a fresh round. "We buy them time." Marcus's voice was tight with understanding. "And then we disappear." The tower groaned under wind pressure. Below them, gunfire dimmed but didn't stop. It wasn't ending. It was consolidating into something final. Rebecca watched the lead kill team member pass behind cover, then targeted the one following. Boot angle wrong, head position betraying intent. She fired. Another body fell. David whispered, "Now they know we're here." "Good," Rebecca said. Marcus stared at her with something unreadable in his expression. "They told me you broke after the tribunal. Lost your edge completely." Rebecca's response was quiet but clear. "They were right. I broke away from them." The map on concrete fluttered as another gust swept the ridge. Below, another flare blinked once. Jonathan was still alive, still fighting. Rebecca adjusted her grip and stayed on target. "They're not dead until I say they are." Wind carried dust through the tower's fractured walls like whispered secrets. Rebecca's cheek rested against the rifle stock, her hand steady despite having no orders, no rank, and no line of retreat. Below, what remained of ghost teams scrambled toward the eastern draw under increasingly accurate fire. They weren't shooting back anymore. They were out of ammunition, out of options, and running on borrowed time. 3 years ago, Rebecca had been ordered to take a shot. A child stood near a radio antenna, barefoot and calm. The satellite briefing labeled him a spotter. The directive was clear. Engage the target. But Rebecca saw something different. The looseness in the boy's posture, the way his face turned away from the action. Too young, too unaware. She refused to fire. The tribunal called it insubordination. Jonathan said he misunderstood the command and took responsibility. That lie destroyed his future and earned him a transfer to the unit now dying in the valley below. Rebecca never forgot the cost of her conscience. Now the enemy wore familiar gear. Same boots, same vest configuration, same green-tinted glasses she used to clean with her sleeve before every patrol. But the men inside weren't looking for resistance. They were executing a cleanup operation, one room at a time. She watched. The lead pair peel left, moving with rehearsed efficiency toward the last cover, where Jonathan's team was trapped. Marcus's voice crackled through static. "We can't engage Americans. This crosses every line we have left." Rebecca didn't look up from her scope. "They're not here for Americans." Ashley's response was sharp with fear. "If we fire on federal operators, we're already dead." Rebecca didn't argue. She fired. The lead operator's leg buckled under him. The second turned toward the sound. Rebecca's follow-up shot destroyed the communication device on his shoulder. The third man pivoted into view. She clipped the wall beside his sightline, filling his vision with concrete dust. She wasn't shooting to kill, just to stop. David moved first, breaking from the tower and racing downslope. His breathing came loud through the comlink, counting distance instead of expressing fear. Below, Jonathan dragged a wounded teammate while another provided covering fire. Rebecca didn't need magnification to recognize his movements. Left shift. Pause. Drop low, the same rhythm he'd used years ago when she failed to take a shot, and he covered for her decision. Now her finger moved without hesitation. A round to disable, not kill. Another to destroy equipment instead of lives. A third that removed a weapon from hostile hands without touching the man holding it. Marcus stayed silent. Ashley's hands trembled over her controls, but never pulled her own trigger. Rebecca fired. Again. An operator with clear sightlines on Jonathan dropped his rifle mid-draw, his wrist clipped by surgical precision. She swung toward the eastern ridge. The escape route was almost clear. One of the black-clad figures approached the tower. Base, not charging climbing. She recognized the tactical approach. Flank, isolate, neutralize. She waited until his boot hit the first ladder rung, then fired. The round severed steel beneath his foot. He dropped backward, alive, but out of the fight. She pivoted again, fired wide of another man's position. He dove for cover. She didn't pursue. Years ago, she placed her rifle on that tribunal table and walked away without explanation. Jonathan never asked why. He just absorbed the consequences and carried them silently. That day, she gave up her place in the war. Today, she took it back. David's voice crackled through. Package secured. All personnel accounted. Moving to extraction point. Need 30 seconds. Rebecca didn't respond verbally. She fired again, another warning shot into empty ground near the fallback position. One figure looked up, spotted the glint from her scope, and withdrew without her needing to touch him. Ashley whispered, "They're pulling back." "Not for long," Rebecca said, changing magazines with practiced efficiency. David confirmed. "We're in the draw. 60 seconds to clear." Rebecca nodded to herself. "You'll have them." Marcus looked at her as he shouldered his pack. "Are you staying?" Rebecca didn't reply. From the ridge, she could see the last of Jonathan's team disappearing into the broken drainage culvert. A single flare blinked once the all-clear signal, but The operators were adapting, regrouping. The tempo was changing again. Another silhouette moved into view. He spotted her scope reflection and dropped behind cover. She let him go. The next one leaned out too far. She fired a split second before he could acquire his target, shattering his rifle barrel. No one came to replace him. In her memory, the boy she hadn't shot stood quietly in the Syrian dust, not confused, not afraid, just still, just young. Now, no one looked up toward her position. David's voice came through one final time, clear and moving. All packages delivered. Rebecca stood slowly, joints stiff from hours of motionless precision. She slung her rifle across her back and pulled the last emergency flare from her belt, crushing it in her fist instead of firing it. David had asked for 30 seconds. She'd given them everything. The silence that followed was deeper than the gunfire that preceded it. Rebecca remained on a tower platform, watching through her scope as dust settled over the compound like a shroud. The kill team was regrouping, their movements now cautious and uncertain. They'd come expecting to erase a small problem quietly. Instead, they'd encountered something they couldn't classify or contain. Marcus's voice came through her earpiece, distant and metallic. Satellite shows multiple vehicles approaching from the west. Heavy transport moving fast. Rebecca tracked the compound through her scope. Bodies lay scattered where they'd fallen, some permanent, others temporary. The temporary ones were beginning to stir, checking wounds, testing limbs. Professional soldiers assessing damage and adapting to new circumstances. How long? She asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. Ashley's transmission crackled with interference. Jonathan's team is clear of the immediate zone, but they're moving. On foot with wounded. They need time. Rebecca understood. Time was what she'd been buying all morning. Time was what she'd continue to buy until there was no more to spend. She watched the lead kill team operator struggle to his feet, favoring the leg she'd clipped. He was speaking into a radio, gesturing toward the tower. Soon they'd coordinate. A proper assault on her position. She'd held them off with precision and surprise, but those advantages were depleting rapidly. David's voice, "Rebecca, you need to extract, now." She didn't respond. Below, one of the operators was setting up what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Professional military equipment for a professional military problem. Marcus tried again. "There's a drainage tunnel 50 meters. North of your position. Leads to an old mining road. You can still get out." Rebecca chambered another round. Not finished yet. The first RPG round screamed past the tower. Close enough that she felt the heat wash over her position. Concrete fragments rained down from the impact point. She adjusted her scope and found the launcher's operator through the dissipating smoke. One shot. He dropped the weapon and fell backward. But they were learning her pattern now, coordinating their movements. She could delay them, disrupt them, force them to move carefully, but she couldn't stop them indefinitely. Ashley's voice was tight. "Heavy vehicles are 10 minutes out. Military designation. This isn't cleanup anymore, it's erasure." Rebecca knew what that meant. Whatever was coming wouldn't discriminate between hostiles and witnesses. Everyone in this valley was about to become a footnote in a classified report. She fired 3 more times in rapid succession, not at people, but at equipment. A radio antenna snapped and sparked. A vehicle's front tire exploded. An ammunition crate detonated in a shower of sparks and debris. Each shot bought precious seconds while the kill team scrambled for new cover. Marcus, Jonathan's team has reached the secondary extraction point. They're safe. The words hung in the air like a prayer answered. Rebecca had accomplished what she'd come here to do. Jonathan was alive. His team was moving towards safety. The debt she'd carried for 3 years was finally paid. but the operators below weren't retreating. They were setting up a perimeter, preparing to hold the valley until reinforcements arrived. Anyone trying to leave would walk into a killing field, unless someone kept their attention focused elsewhere. Rebecca shifted her position, moving to the tower's opposite side. From here she could see the drainage tunnel Marcus had mentioned, a dark mouth in the hillside surrounded by loose rocks and scrub brush. It was maybe 60 meters away. She could reach it if she moved fast and stayed low. Instead, she settled into a new firing position and acquired her next target. David's voice. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" She fired once more, forcing an advancing operator to dive for cover, just as he was about to establish line of sight on the tunnel entrance. "Buying time," she said simply. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder with each passing minute, a rhythmic thudding that Rebecca felt in her chest as much as heard with her ears. She counted rotor signatures, 2 heavy transport birds, and at least 1 attack helicopter riding escort. Professional military response to what had started as a quiet cleanup operation. Marcus's voice crackled through increasing interference. "Satellite feed is being jammed. I'm losing visual on everything." Rebecca adjusted her scope one final time, scanning the compound for remaining threats. The kill team had taken cover behind armored vehicles that must have arrived while she was focused on other targets. Professional soldiers with professional equipment, now treating this like the military operation it had become. "How long until Jonathan's team reaches safety?" she asked. David responded immediately. 40 minutes to the border. They're moving as fast as the wounded allow. 40 minutes. Rebecca had enough ammunition for maybe 10 more precision shots. The approaching helicopters would arrive in 5 minutes or less. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. Ashley's transmission was barely audible. Through static. There's another way out. Emergency extraction point. Alpha, remember the old protocols? Rebecca remembered. Emergency extraction point. Alpha was a code phrase from operations that officially never happened. It meant sacrifice one to save many. It meant someone wasn't coming home. Negative, Rebecca said. I finished this properly. She acquired a target through her scope, an operator, attempting to set up a heavy machine gun with line of sight on the escape routes. One shot disabled the weapon. Another forced the operator to abandon his position. But for every threat she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take its place. The kill team had called in serious backup, and serious backup was nearly here. Marcus. First. Helicopter is visible on horizon. Attack configuration. Rebecca could see it now, a dark speck growing larger against the pale sky. In minutes, it would be directly overhead with enough firepower to reduce the entire tower to rubble. She fired again, forcing advancing infantry to halt their approach. But she was fighting a delaying action now, buying minutes instead of hours. David's voice was urgent. Rebecca, you've done enough. More than enough. Extract now while you still can. She thought about the photograph taped above her desk. 5 soldiers laughing in the desert before everything went wrong. 4 of them had survived the tribunal. 3 had rebuilt their lives. 1 had carried the cost of conscience for 3 years. Today, all debts were paid. Jonathan's team clear of immediate danger? She asked. Affirmative. They're in friendly territory. Rebecca nodded to herself. The mission was complete. Everything else was just details. She fired her remaining rounds in careful sequence, not at people, but at equipment that could be used to pursue escaping friendlies. Communications gear sparked and died. Vehicle tires exploded. Fuel tanks ruptured and began burning. When her magazine was empty, she didn't reload. Instead, she stood slowly and walked to the edge of the platform. The helicopter was close enough, now that she could see weapons pods slung beneath its stubby wings. In 30 seconds, Those weapons would reduce her position to memory. Rebecca pulled her old unit patch from her pocket, the same one she'd worn in the photograph. Faded now, beyond recognition. She looked at it once, then let the wind carry it away. Marcus's voice one last time. "Rebecca, respond. What's your status?" She keyed her radio and spoke clearly. "Tell Jonathan the debt is settled. Tell him I kept my word." Then she turned off the transmitter and dropped it beside her empty rifle. The helicopter's first missile streaked toward the tower with mathematical precision. Rebecca watched it approach without moving, without fear, with something that felt remarkably like peace. Some debts can only be paid one way. Some shots matter more than the ones you take. 6 months later, in a cafe that didn't appear on any tourist maps, Jonathan sat alone at a table near a dusty window. The place existed in the spaces between borders, where questions weren't asked and coffee was strong enough to forget whatever brought you there. His left arm was still stiff from wounds that had mostly healed. Physical therapy helped, but some damage goes deeper than muscle and bone. He stirred sugar into his cup with mechanical precision, the same way he'd cleaned his rifle every morning for 15 years. The news had reported a terrorist attack on a Syrian installation. American advisors had been caught in the crossfire, but extracted safely thanks to rapid response protocols. No mention of rogue operators. No mention of Rebecca. She'd simply been erased from the story, the same way she'd been erased from official records 3 years ago. But Jonathan remembered. He remembered the impossible shots that had kept his team alive. He remembered the precision that had disabled enemies without killing them unnecessarily. He remembered the sacrifice that had bought them time to escape when professional killers came to ensure no witnesses survived. Most of all, he remembered the debt. 3 years ago, Rebecca had refused an order to shoot a child. Jonathan had lied to protect her career and destroyed his own in the process. Yesterday, she'd paid that debt in full with interest, compounded by time and distance and blood. The caf door opened with a whisper of desert wind. David entered, moving carefully, checking corners from habit. He spotted Jonathan and approached without hurry. "Coffee's terrible here," David said, settling into the opposite chair. "I've had worse," Jonathan replied. They sat in comfortable silence. Two soldiers who'd shared enough dangerous moments to communicate without words. David's gear was civilian now, his hair longer than military regulation. Like Jonathan, he was learning to exist in the spaces between official existence. "Marcus found something," David said eventually. He placed a small metal object on the table. Between them, it was dull steel, scratched from use, shaped like crossed rifles over a shield. Rebecca's unit patch, the metal one she'd worn on dress occasions. Where? Mail slot at his apartment. No return address, no note. Jonathan picked up the insignia, feeling its weight. The metal was warm from David's pocket, the edges worn smooth by years of handling. "She planned it," Jonathan said. "The whole thing. She knew how it would end." David nodded slowly. "Marcus thinks she mailed it before the mission. Had it ready to go." Jonathan turned the insignia over in his fingers. On the back, barely visible, someone had scratched 2 words. "Debt paid." "Ashley wants to meet," David continued. "Says there's something we need to discuss." "About Rebecca?" "About what comes next." Jonathan understood. In their world, nothing ended cleanly. Rebecca's sacrifice had saved his team, but it had also exposed the existence of people who weren't supposed to exist. The kind of people who took shots that mattered and made decisions that cost everything. Where? Tomorrow. Border cafe near the old crossing. You know the one. Jonathan knew it. Another place that existed in the margins, where former soldiers gathered to remember friends who'd paid prices too high to calculate. He pocketed the insignia and stood to leave. Outside, wind scattered dust across the empty street like memories across time. In the distance, oil fires still burned black smoke against an endless sky. "Jonathan," David called as he reached the door. "Yeah? She saved all of us." "Not just that day. All of us." Jonathan nodded once and stepped into the heat. The cafe door closed behind him with barely a sound, the kind of quiet that follows gunfire and settles into silence. Rebecca had kept her word. The debt was paid in full, but some stories don't end with payment. Some stories continue in the spaces between official reports, carried forward by people who remember what courage looks like when it costs everything. Jonathan walked toward his vehicle, the metal insignia warm against his chest like a promise kept. In 3 years, he'd learned to live with conscience. Today, he'd learned to live with peace. The desert wind whispered across empty roads, carrying dust and memory in equal measure. Somewhere in that vastness, Rebecca had made her final shot, not with a rifle, but with a choice that echoed longer than any bullet ever could. Behind him, the cafe remained exactly what it had always been, a place for the forgotten to remember, and for the living to honor the dead. Jonathan drove toward the border, toward whatever came next, carrying the weight of friendship and the lightness of absolution in equal measure. Some debts can only be paid once. Some payments echo forever. Authors note: this story is dedicated to those who take the shots that matter most, not always with weapons, but with conscience, courage, and the willingness to pay prices others cannot calculate. In the spaces between official histories, these are the stories that define who we choose to become. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.